Today, the Union-Tribune Editorial Board is joined by Janessa Goldbeck, a candidate for District 4 County Supervisors. Janessa, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
And why don't we start with why you want this job? Last time we spoke in this capacity during a campaign interview, you were a congressional candidate, different race, different time now. Tell us a little bit about why you decided to run for this seat.
Yeah, well, great to be here with you again. And, I think the motivating factor back then is the same one that is now. This is my home. I grew up here in San Diego County. I was stationed here twice, started a business here, got married here. This is my home, and it really matters to me what happens here. And I've spent 15 years as a policy advocate working to make change at the federal, state, and local level that makes a real impact in people's lives. And when it became clear to me that this seat on the county board was opening up, what I thought would be an open seat in a few years, I decided to throw my hat in the ring and run for it because I want to put my years of experience to work for my hometown. And I really see the county as the place that is where the rubber meets the road on our region's most pressing challenges. When it comes to homelessness, when it comes to affordability, when it comes to public safety, the county has the ability to really make an impact in people's lives. I think that became increasingly clear over the course of the pandemic, but has certainly been a lot more active part of our making our community stronger over the last few years. And so I think as a Marine Corps veteran, as a lifelong San Diegan, as a member of the LGBTQ community, which is centered here in the heart of this district, I have a lot to bring. And I think that people want to see things done a little bit differently. They're sick of politics as usual. Politicians keep telling them things are going to get better. They're not. Homelessness is on the rise. Crime is on the rise. Cost of living is through the roof. I mean, rents are surpassing San Francisco's as of some reporting today. So I think it's important to bring someone to the board who, has the courage to think a little bit outside of the box, to think independently, has the experience to hit the ground running, because we need to get the county back to work immediately, but it's going to make a real difference for San Diegans.
And tell me a little bit about how you're approaching the campaign. You kind of alluded to this earlier, but when you first jumped into the race, you thought you'd have a 3-year runway, and clearly that's sped up, and it's allowing Amy Reichert to run after she just run less than a year ago, and Monica Montgomery-Stepp is involved. Two people with name recognition because of their campaigns in recent years. How are you approaching it differently? What different strategies are you using? Not that I'm asking you to tell us your playbook. You're certainly not going to share that. But I'm just curious in terms of strategies, approach, policy issues. How different is this race than it might have been in a couple of years?
Yeah, well, when I launched back in February, before the Nathan Fletcher scandal erupted, I thought I had a couple of years to lay the groundwork. Obviously didn't make the decision to run lightly. Something that I had a lot of conversations with my political mentors, people like Senator Tony Atkins and Congressman Scott Peters, who are supporting me, community groups that I've been a part of, and other stakeholders in our community. And the thought process was get out early. One of the things people hate about politicians is when they meet them, and for the first time they're meeting them, they're asking for something. So I really wanted to do it differently. I wanted to have a long lead time to get to have conversations, really in-depth conversations with the diverse spectrum of folks and organizations in our community. But obviously, I always say in the Marine Corps, no plan survives first contact. A couple weeks out of the gate and everything changed. So now we're 35 days away from Election Day, and just moving at a very fast clip. But I'm happy to share with you the strategy, which isn't a whole lot different, honestly, just a lot more compressed timeline. And that's to talk to as many voters as possible. Initially, our thinking about this would have been either an appointment process or a special election. When Nathan Fletcher moved on to the state Senate, that would have opened up his seat before his term was over. So the idea was always to have as many direct conversations with voters as possible. So we've had a very aggressive field program going from the very beginning. I'm out talking to voters every single day, whether that's on the phone or walking and knocking on doors, getting a really excellent tan/sunburn look to myself here. But the reality is most people do not know that there's an election just a few weeks away. Everybody I'm talking to has heard about Nathan Fletcher. They've heard about the resignation. They have no idea that ballots are hitting mailboxes next week. So think the next month we're going to see obviously a huge uptick in voter communications from entities and groups that are interested in supporting, either of us candidates, any of us candidates. But at the end of the day, I think with a low turnout, low information election like a special in the middle of the summer, it's really important for the candidate themselves to be out there talking to voters. That's what I'm doing.
Let me ask you a philosophical question before I turn the mic to my colleagues for more issue-specific questions. I'm kind of curious, it's a really divided, polarizing time, and on such a range of issues, from transit to climate to housing. People have different solutions in their minds depending on their political backgrounds and other factors. So people's needs and wants don't align, so much. How do you approach that as a leader? How would you listen to everyone, make decisions where people feel heard when that gap between needs and wants is so different?
Yeah, well, I think, Matt, a little bit more of my story than maybe everybody here, but, I was born and raised in Encinitas. My parents are white, vegetarian, Hindu pacifists. They're white Hindus. I call them Windus. It's not really a thing, but that's how I was raised. When I came out to my parents, they were like, well, we love you no matter what. When I told them that I was joining the Marine Corps, they were like, these are not the values we raised you with. They were horrified. And so, I entered the Marine Corps at the age of 26. I've been a Democrat my entire life, gay woman. Marine Corps is less than 10% women, a very, an environment that was very different, let's say, than the human rights world, which is where I was before I was in the Marines. And I had a very successful and rewarding career there, learning how to lead a very diverse group of individuals from all walks of life. That's one of the best parts about being in the military. And I think that one of the lessons that I drew from that experience is that making sure people understand what the mission and the goal is. You can bring diverse groups of people together to get things done, even if they don't agree on everything. They know what the mission is. They're all driving there together. And I think when it comes to local government, people want to see folks who are willing to reach across the aisle to get things done, to move the ball forward. People are sick of hearing politicians shout at each other from different corners and nothing getting done. Before I got into this race, I made an effort to sit down with all of the supervisors and introduce myself, Republicans and Democrats. I had a really nice lunch with Supervisor Joel Anderson, and I complimented him on his legislative record. When he was in the Senate, he wrote over 40 bills with Nancy Skinner, one of the most liberal members of the state Senate. And I said, I really appreciate that you're not an ideologue. And he said, oh, whoa. I am an ideologue. I just want to get stuff done. And that really appeals to me. I think I fall in the same boat. I'm very firm in my beliefs and my values, but at the end of the day, if I can work together with somebody to move the ball forward, that's what I've done as a leader at Voice Foundation, working to pass federal and state legislation. You have to work across the aisle. And yeah, you might not agree with that person on the next issue of the day, but at the end of the day, the goal of public service and the goal of elected officials, in my opinion, is to get things done, not just stand in their corners and shout.
I assume you had lunch with Vargas and Lawson Reamer and Desmond as well? Did they?
I did. I was on my way to scheduling with Desmond when the Fletcher story cracked open. So we have not had a chance yet. But my stepsister is in economic development at the city of San Marcos, and he was her mayor for a long time. So we have some connection there.
Great. Thanks so much. I'm going to pass the mic to these guys now.
Hello. So I wanted to ask a couple questions about homelessness. It's become increasingly clear that the homelessness approaches between the different cities in the region are very different, and that is causing its own problems on top of the homelessness problems that we already have. So I wonder, how would you foster more regional collaboration with local governments in your position, particularly when it comes to homelessness?
Yeah, I think the city of San Diego, we've seen certainly the mayor as frustration with the lack of other cities around the region stepping up to offer services. And I think at the county, our role can really be to lead on providing emergency shelter. You know, the county has an excess of land. We also have health and human services and behavioral health services. So I'd like to see the county stepping up to relieve some of the burden on cities around the region by putting emergency shelter on its own land. We can utilize building technologies like prefabricated homes to do this quickly. We can help by opening safe parking lots or safe camping lots and bringing in service providers. But the burden, the county is the largest, best resourced entity in the region, and it should be leading on helping provide emergency shelter when it comes to homelessness. Second thing I'll say is we know that homelessness is a function of a lack of affordable housing. And when it comes to lack of affordable housing, the county, again, has plenty of opportunities to step up and do its part in a more aggressive way. I was really happy to see the supervisors allocating additional funding in their most recent budget to working with nonprofit partners to build workforce housing on county land. I think that's a great step. Again, looking at other newer building technologies that allow us to build faster and cheaper. The biggest thing I hear from folks who are trying to build across our region is just frustration with our permitting process. And so if we can find ways to streamline and make our permitting process more efficient and faster and less duplicative at the county, that goes a long way as well to helping us build more affordable housing faster. You know, in the Marine Corps, I was a combat engineer. You know, you don't want me to build like a very complex building. We're not trained to do that. We're not Navy Seabees or the Army Corps of Engineers. But one of the things we're trained very well to do is examine processes and identify where there's waste and where there are inefficiencies. And I think in talking to folks at our Development Services Department, making sure that they have the right people in place, that they have the right expertise, and if they don't, finding ways that we can help get them that so that our Development Services Department is moving as efficiently as possible.
Thank you. So obviously it's not just a homelessness crisis, it's a mental health crisis, an addiction crisis, all of these concurrent crises. So I'm wondering, do you support a housing first approach, or do you think that services should be mandatory in order to get certain kinds of assistance?
I absolutely support housing first. I think the rhetorical twist that we're seeing from the far right, shelter first with treatment, is just a rhetorical twist, and it is literally what housing first means. It means put a roof over someone's head so that they can go and get the treatment that they need, or they can make their doctor's appointments, or they can go talk to an employment services counselor. A couple of things, you know, my wife runs a housing program for transitional aged foster youth here in San Diego County, 18 to 24-year-olds who have exited the foster care system. In San Diego County, if you turn 18 in the foster care system, you're 25% of youth who turn 18 in San Diego County in the foster youth system wind up on the streets. So this program was established to help provide sort of a transition for them into adulthood, taking into account the fact that many of these kids have had really tumultuous childhoods. And so they are placed in an apartment with reduced rent. They learn to pay, you know, the rent goes up over time, but they have counselors and a social worker, and they help them get into school or get into counseling or get a job. And the outcomes for this program are tremendous. Over 85% of kids who exit the program when they age out are either fully employed or have a college degree. And when I think about that, the primary difference between that and just making a college prep program available to someone is that you're starting with giving them a place to live. So yes, I fundamentally support housing first. And I think attempts to paint it as something other than it's not are just ways to confuse people. I also think that you know, permanent supportive housing has been proven to be the #1 way to get people off the streets. Permanent supportive housing is when we provide intensive case management to folks while giving them a place to live. We know that there's a huge mental health crisis here in San Diego County and across the country. And one of the biggest problems is that we don't have the appropriate facilities for people to go who have acute mental health disorders or behavioral health issues. I currently serve on the county's behavioral health advisory board, and I hear month after month from Dr. Luke Bergman, our director of behavioral health services, about their lack of personnel. We as a region are expected to have a shortage of over 18,000 behavioral health workers in the next decade. So at the county, we really need to invest in ensuring we're providing competitive pay and benefits so we can attract and retain this workforce, as well as making sure that there are facilities for them to work in. And that's one of the biggest problems. We lost a lot of long-term care facilities over the pandemic. There are ways that the state is looking at bringing back more board and cares and psychiatric facilities, but the county needs to be proactively leading on those things. If we don't, we will never have the appropriate places for people to get to once they are engaged with a service provider. So we have to invest in those long-term facilities, as well as making sure we have the appropriate workforce.
Would you have voted for the camping ban? Were you on the city council last month?
Well, I sort of have a knee-jerk reaction to hypotheticals, things I would have done or wouldn't have done if elected. I will say that I appreciate that the mayor and members of the council who are trying to move the ball forward on providing more shelter options. I don't think we can arrest our way out of homelessness, but I also don't think doing nothing is an appropriate option. And it's important that the county does its part again in providing more emergency shelter options instead of just making it the cities of San Diego's problem. And we talked a little bit earlier about a couple of ways we could do that. But I think it's important that we have leaders who understand how frustrating it is for business owners and residents downtown who feel unsafe, as well as for people who have worked as homeless advocates and worked in the space and know that if you put someone in jail for 72 hours, that doesn't solve the problem. They wind up back on the street again. I don't think anybody wants that. So we have to stop using our jails as our region's largest mental health provider, which they are right now, which is absurd. We need to find ways to make sure that we are diverting people who are in acute mental health crises away from incarceration. But in order to do that, we have to build those facilities. And we are extraordinarily short right now on them.
Thank you.
One last question from me and kind of switching topics. I wanted to ask about the transgender community and the increasing number of hate attacks that we're seeing and targeting of this community in San Diego County and across the nation. What do you think, what would you do in this role to support this community? And is there anything that you think the county should be doing to support this community better that it isn't currently doing?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. This is definitely one of the motivating features for me running for this office. I think we need elected officials at every level of government who are not just allies of the LGBTQ community or the trans community, but are going to be champions for them. I'm really proud to have been recently rolled off as the co-chair of the San Diego LGBT Center's board. In that role, I was part of the effort to push the county to remove a commissioner who's currently still sitting on the Human Rights Commission who made transphobic comments and has stood by them. You, as an editorial board, rightly called him out. But that was an example, I think, of where the county failed our transgender community, failed to stand up against the hateful rhetoric. This isn't just that one instance. Across the country, we're seeing a rapid increase and rise in anti-LGBT legislation, hundreds of bills targeting the LGBTQ community, but in particular trans people and trans youth and families who have trans children and non-binary kids. And we're seeing it, in La Mesa. I was out in La Mesa a couple of weeks ago. There was a council member attempting to ban the pride flag. In Carlsbad, there's a council member who's compared the Confederate flag to the pride flag, which stands for inclusion. Just over the weekend, there were anti-LGBT and anti-Semitic flyers distributed in parts of East County. So this is real. It's not just happening in other states. It's happening right here in San Diego County. And we have an opportunity. I'd be the first openly gay woman to serve on this county board of supervisors, I think is incredibly important. That visibility is incredibly important, especially for a district that contains the heart of our community. And I think making sure that our Health and Human Services Department is set up and primed and culturally prepared to handle a diverse group of folks and clients that it serves is a big part of that. And a big part of leadership is asking those questions and ensuring that every member of our community gets the appropriate care and services that they deserve.
Thank you.
Sorry, my internet is lagging, so I hope it doesn't bother us here. But I want to ask you about public transportation. When was the last time that you used it in San Diego? Or what are you driving currently? And what are your thoughts? How can we make public transportation better in our county?
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan of public transit, and I want our public transit system to actually work for San Diegans. It does in some places. You know, the Blue Line, I think, is a great example. 17 million people took the Blue Line last year. That's because it works as a real alternative for using a car for people who are coming from across the border or San Ysidro up to downtown, all the way up to the UCSD. And that UCSD extension was the first Sandag project in history to come in on time and under budget, although it took us 30 years to authorize it. So let's not pat ourselves on the back too hard here. I think that's great, but I get a little frustrated with public transit plans that seem to me to be pie in the sky or unrealistic or take 30 to 50 years to materialize. I want more San Diegans to be taking public transit now. And if we're going to do that, we need to make it faster and more efficient, and cleaner and safer and more accessible for people who are in wheelchairs or have other disabilities. So a couple of ideas, you know, one, I think if we invested if we invested in increasing the frequency of routes we already have, making sure buses come more often, if we looked at things like building overpasses over trolley stops or trolley intersections so that they didn't have to stop and they could just go through them, that would shave minutes off commute times. That also proven to be safer and quieter, so better for neighborhoods. You know, that Blue Line just from the border to downtown, putting an express track adjacent to the track we already have. Yes, it's expensive. That's a big expenditure, but it is also something that is easier to do because the track is already there. And then investing in transit into East County. You know, we have a lot of areas of the county that we've said we can't build in because they're not close to transit. Well, the county has the ability to solve that. And given that we have a housing crisis, it seems to me that the solution shouldn't be to rule out areas of land around pre-existing urban development that are not in high wildfire zones, but instead to run transit out to those places, invest in our unincorporated communities and our East County cities, and ensure that people can take transit to and from them. Fixed rail doesn't have to be the solution to everything. Clean energy buses are great too. So you asked me the last time I took public transit in San Diego County. I honestly can't remember because it doesn't work for me. I can't take it to the airport. I can't take it anywhere that matters. I have an e-bike and that's my sort of local commute option. But it's really frustrating to me. I've lived in Chicago. I've lived in Washington, D.C. I've lived in New York. I never had a car until I was an adult because I didn't need one in those cities. And I think many San Diegans would like to have those options, but just don't right now.
What do you think about the $160 billion 5 big moves that Sandag has proposed?
Yeah, I mean, I support Sandag's 5 big moves plan, but I think, you know, Sandag has lost the public trust time and time again, and has not given us a reason to think that there's a reality to their time frame. So I think we need to be very we need to observe how Sandag is using its money and be very clear-eyed about whether or not dollars are going to projects that they say they're going to go to. Many of us would like to see our region be transformed, but we also want to make sure that our money is being used wisely.
2008 bullet train passed and it was supposed to be completed by now. Instead, it's 15 years behind on a 15-year later, and there's no way for the bullet train to obtain land to build new rail in wealthy areas. And so 3 years ago, I asked Sandag, Hassan Akrada specifically, how do you contemplate overcoming something that the much better funded state of California couldn't come close to overcoming. And he's never responded. Poway Mayor Steve Vouch told me he's asked the same question when he was on Sandiag, and there's never a response. So when I hear people say they support this plan, I wonder how well they know it. If the people behind it can't even answer the very basic question, what do you guys know that the state doesn't? Because how else can you quickly set up rail in populated areas with $1 million homes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair question, and I think we deserve to know, I think that this is something that we see at the city of San Diego all the time. There's a plan put in place with no real implementation attached to it. And I do think it's a reason why people feel frustrated by government, because they're told things are going to happen, but there's no funding source behind it. There's no actual plan for how we get from point A to point B. So to your point, I mean, I think people have a right to feel disillusioned and like it's just fairy dust. So that's why I think it's important, while we think through our longer term regional goals, that we actually put into motion things that are achievable and doable, and that we can fund now, that get people, get more people utilizing the transit systems that we already have. And that, I think, helps us build the groundwork for public trust in these larger projects that will take significant investment of both resources and stakeholders.
Thank you.
Tanya, did you have additional questions?
Giving me issues this afternoon. It was doing it this morning too, but anyway, I will keep up going with my second question about the diversity in your district, in District 4. I know that it's the most diverse district in the county, and what message would you give to people that it's in that district but cannot vote, either because of their undocumented status or refugee status? What would be your message for them?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. This is the most diverse district in the county, diverse for a lot of different reasons. We've talked about veterans and military families, LGBTQ community, Black community, AAPI community, a large Latino community, and of course, we've got cities as well as unincorporated parts of the county as well. So diverse in a lot of different ways. Our refugee community is also very big here. We've got a lot of folks, a lot of different immigrants from all over the place. And I think it's really important that we realize that no supervisor, no individual is going to know everything about all of these communities. That's one of the things about District 4 that's so special and so unique. So my commitment would be to any member of the community that as a supervisor, I want to ensure that my staff reflects the diversity of District 4, that we have representation from our diverse communities, but also that knowing that most offices are not very accessible to everyday people. I've worked as a policy advocate in DC, on the Hill, in Sacramento, in local government, and most people don't know where their elected official's office is, or nor can they afford to take time off work to come down and talk to them in person. So I think it's really important as a leader to get out of the county administration building, to get out of your circle. I know as a Marine officer, when I wanted to see how my Marines and sailors were living in the barracks, if I told the sergeants I was going to show up, well, those barracks would be spick and span. Everything would be cleaned up, vegetables in the fridge, water bottles on ice, air freshener, all of that. But if I just showed up, I'd see how they were really living and what was really going on and get to hear from them directly. So I think that same principle applies in a county this big, getting out, making sure that you're holding town halls, that you're swinging by community events where people can talk to you directly is really important. And of course, it's a big district. There's hundreds of thousands of residents. You can't talk to everybody, but making that a priority is something that's very important to me.
Thank you. And another topic, I want to talk to you about the border. I know that District 4 is not necessarily located in the border, but the county is. And so you would be voting on issues that involve the border too. So I want to know, what are your thoughts on problems that are currently in that area of the county, and how frequent do you visit the border or cross the border?
Yeah, well, I cross the border relatively frequently. I have friends who live in Mexico. I haven't been down in the last couple of months since things have gotten pretty crazy in my professional life here. But you know, I think a couple of things we know that the County Board of Supervisors really needs to be paying attention to when it comes to our cross-border region. One is obviously our crossings and ensuring that we are doing everything we can to fast-track resources to get people and goods over the border as quickly as possible that are coming, people who are part of our economy and our tourism industry and all of that. Second is, of course, the Tijuana River sewage issue. And, you know, I was glad to see the supervisors and our congressional delegation ask the Biden administration for additional help here. It's absolutely absurd that we haven't received the resources necessary to actually solve this problem. It isn't some sort of pie in the sky engineering problem. It's very well known how we can fix it. And when I think about the president appearing in Pennsylvania a couple of weeks ago and getting that bridge fixed like that, makes me think, you know, wonder, well, why does that happen so quickly when we have this massive international ecological and ecological disaster that's also impacting our tourism and our businesses and our safety. Well, the reality is, you know, in national politics and federal politics, it has to be a priority for the president, right? And the reason Pennsylvania is a priority for the president is because it's a very important electoral state. And so how do we make this issue important for the president? Well, the water is sickening our sailors. It is causing problems for the Navy. That is a national security prerogative. And I've worked with the Biden administration to do big things when it comes to conservation in public lands. And in terms of, in the last year alone, I was at went to the White House to and met the president 3 times to watch him designate over 500,000 acres of public lands as new national monuments. The first time the Antiquities Act has been used in a number of years. And I think it's possible to make these things priorities for the federal government, but we have to really engage our federal delegation. I'm very proud to be endorsed by the majority of ours. And I would work with them to make this a national security prerogative for the president, to ensure that the administration cannot ignore this like they have been over the past years and years and years that we've been saying this is a problem that needs to be addressed. So we can't, we're not going to get anybody's attention if we keep doing things the same old way. We need to ensure that we're being extraordinarily loud, that we're working with our military partners, base commanders, and our federal delegation to make this a priority for the administration.
Thank you.
Janessa, going back to transportation just a little bit, I have 2 questions for you. They're very different. The first one is, we're being asked and pushed to try to move into more electric vehicles and get away from gasoline vehicles, but the infrastructure here in San Diego County is not inviting to do so. So what would be your plan for that, to move into that direction? Given all the issues with climate and transportation.
Yeah, well, there are historic amounts of funding coming from the federal government to upgrade our infrastructure, to upgrade our grid, to invest in more climate resilient infrastructure. Historic amounts of money coming from the bipartisan infrastructure law, from the Inflation Reduction Act. And we need to make sure that San Diego County is prepared to go after every available dollar to put that to work. Right now, our county gets its butt kicked by other counties around the state in terms of per capita federal dollars. I think that's wrong. We should never leave a single dollar on the table. We should be going after those things. We need to make sure our county has the right people in place who know how to go after those funds and bring them home and put them to work, so that San Diego County is not only upgrading so we can get to that, but actually leading the state. I would like us to lead the state, and I think that that's going to require us being a little more aggressive about what kinds of funds we're going after. In 2018, when the county was all Republican Board of Supervisors, Democrats, were howling about, well, we need to get Democrats elected because the county's just sitting on this giant slush fund, this giant reserve, and they're not putting it to work to do the types of infrastructure upgrades that need to be done or to address the homelessness crisis. And back then, the county reserve fund was $2.4 billion, which was 3 times what the state says is a fiscally responsible amount. Now, we know that we're headed potentially towards some economic downturn, and it's important to keep a healthy reserve on hand. But it's 2023, we've had a Democratic majority, and the reserve fund is still $2.4 billion, with over $680 million in unrestricted funds available. So when I think about some of these things that we know we need to make progress on, we know we need to address the homelessness crisis more proactively, we know we need to build more affordable housing, we know we need to invest in infrastructure that allows us to reduce gasoline-powered car emissions. We have the resources to do it. They're out there. We just need to have the political will and the sense of urgency, not to take little bites of the apple and nibble around the edges, but to actually do big things. And I think we can if we elect people who are not willing to accept the status quo.
Thank you for that. And also my other question, you touched on it a little bit, excluding homelessness and the sewage issues, you know, here in the South Bay, what would you're going to be voting on a lot of other issues outside of District 4. So what would you say are some of the pressing issues that are not getting the attention that they need in this county? When you look at North County, when you look at the beaches, when you look at, you mentioned a few in East County, but is there anything else that you haven't told us about?
Yeah, well, a couple things. I think, and I touched on this a little bit in our interview questions, but one of the reasons that motivates me, that has motivated me to be more involved locally, and to be engaged in our political system. You know, when I was in my mid-20s, my mom, who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and a few years later that developed into a dementia diagnosis and then Alzheimer's. And I came home. That's why I quit, that's why I cut short my Marine Corps career, was to come home so I could take care of her. My parents are divorced and I'm an only child, and it was something I had to do. And the experience of navigating her from her home into an assisted living facility, and eventually into a board and care facility, was incredibly challenging. And I was someone who at that point was a captain in the Marine Corps with a master's degree, a good, well-paying job, and more resources at hand than most people have. And even then, it was an incredible struggle. The expense of her care was supplemented by her union pension. We were very lucky to have that. We were lucky to have health care, but it was still incredibly expensive, and I had to pay out of my own pocket to make sure she got the care she needed. And when I look at our demographics in this county, and I think about what's going to be required in terms of housing for seniors, what's going to be required in terms of in-home supportive services and caregivers, we're facing a severe shortage of senior care service providers and nurses generally. It's very expensive to live in San Diego County, obviously, and so the wages have not kept up with inflation and the cost of living here. So when we've made we've made great progress as a nation, and even here in San Diego County on veterans homelessness by really zeroing in on veterans, working hand in hand with our federal and state partners to find every available funding source. I think that same approach when it comes to seniors who are, one of the hardest groups to have housed in emergency shelter, because if you can't meet your activities of daily life, there are very few, if any, shelters that will take you in San Diego County. I think this is an issue that is well beyond District 4. It affects our entire region. We know that over 26% of people of our homeless population are people over the age of 65, and most of them are experiencing homelessness for the first time. So when I think about my mom and what would have happened to her if I hadn't been here, she very well could have been in that group of folks, and that's not right. And so making seniors a priority, I think, helps us take a big chunk of our very, very vulnerable homeless population, puts them front and center, and ensures that they're going to be able to live their golden years with dignity and in safety. So I really want to emphasize that. The other thing that we didn't talk about, I don't know, was that the last question, or
No.
Oh, okay. It's like there's so many things we haven't talked about yet, so I'll just stop there.
Andrew, if you're not ready, I'll go ahead with my question. Okay, my question is about the county jails. For years in Los Angeles County, the supervisors there have not hesitated to put the sheriff on notice when they've disagreed with him over various issues and pressuring them through the power of the purse. And yet here in San Diego County, we've had jail deaths for 16, 17 years that exceed norms, and the problem seems to have got worse. But the County Board of Supervisors has never stepped up and said to the Sheriff Gore before he left last February, or to the current sheriff, that we just are unhappy with how this is going. Is that an appropriate role for a county board to take, or should they defer to the elected sheriff?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's completely unacceptable, our jail deaths, and we have seen that we can't fix the problem if we don't understand the problem. The current sheriff had pledged to release all details on jail deaths. That still hasn't occurred, and I absolutely think that needs to change. We need to have more transparency, not less. And the fact that we still have people dying in our jails, outpacing state norms, is immoral, not to mention fiscally irresponsible, because the county is consistently paying out millions and millions of dollars in these wrongful death cases. So a couple of things, I think. First, we need to ensure that if people are in our jails, that they are receiving the care and services they need. We have a severe shorting staffage when it comes to both sworn and non-sworn officers in our jail, so medical staff and psychiatric nurses. When the starting salary for a nurse in a county jail is the same as it is for somebody to be a cashier at Target, we've got a problem, because we're not able to recruit folks into these jobs. So we need to be realistic about what it's going to take to get the appropriate staff in the jails to make sure that if people are having a medical emergency, they get the care they deserve. But bigger than that, we have to zoom out and realize that one of the biggest problems is that we're allowing our county jails to be our region's largest mental health services provider. That's absurd. It's wrong. We have to change that. So a couple of ways the county can do that. One, we have to make sure that our mobile crisis response teams, which have proven to be very effective at diverting people who are experiencing acute psychiatric episodes away from incarceration, we need to expand that program and make sure that there are more mobile crisis response teams that are available. We need to invest in crisis stabilization units across the county so that we have a place to bring people who are experiencing those things, and relieve the burden from emergency rooms. If somebody's not experiencing a medical emergency, but they're having a mental health emergency, putting them in a place where they can receive appropriate care, but where they're not taking a bed away from somebody who's having a heart attack or was in a car accident, I think is really important. And then we're about 700 psychiatric beds short across the region. So instead of, putting 30 beds here, 30 beds here, the county really needs to invest in figuring out how we're going to solve this problem and solve it very quickly. So those are a couple of ways that we can divert folks away from jails. One of the biggest problems in jails when it comes to jail deaths is overdoses. And we know we are about to receive $100 million in settlement funds from this opioid case. Nothing should be off the table. We should be looking at how we can use some of that funding to prevent fentanyl and other dangerous drugs from entering our jails in the first place, so that people are not exposed to them and have the opportunity to overdose while they're in jail. So absolutely think that this problem has been going on for way too long. The state's audit has a lot of recommendations, and the County Board of Supervisors needs to be demanding accountability, monthly progress reports on how we're doing, and making sure that the sheriff is actually implementing all of these audit recommendations.
So should everybody,
would you be in favor of
before getting jails, should everyone be tested? Sorry, Andrew, quick follow-up.
I couldn't, it was a little jumbled. Could you repeat?
Everyone be tested or inspected for drugs upon entering jails, or should there be limits, as the current sheriff now says, that they don't extend to employees? Like, should employees be checked for possession of drugs when they go into jails?
Everything should be on the table. The sheriff's department has said that one of the reasons they can't do that is because they're understaffed and undermanned. That's true. They are understaffed and undermanned. We need to make sure that they are fully staffed and manned. But the fact of the matter is that we have drugs that are continuing to flow into the jails, and everything should be on the table.
Thank you.
The board recently voted to allow staff to review the community reinvestment funds, the discretionary funds that each of the supervisors have. We came down opposed to this. I'm wondering how you feel. Does it sound like the kind of transparency that the county ought to have in that staff is brewing things rather than throwing it out for the public to take a good look at?
I mean, transparency in government right now and trust in government is at a historic low. The reason this seat is open is proof positive of that. And I think at this moment in time, it's more important than ever that we restore faith and confidence and trust in government by being as transparent as possible. And you know, I haven't announced this publicly yet, but I'll share with you. I think it's important that we have a number of transparency measures that we could put in place at the county to help rebuild some of that trust. First and foremost, I think the supervisor's decision was wrong. Of course, community enhancement grants, neighborhood investment grants, those should be public, those should be debated publicly. I do think it's a good idea to have staff review them for conflict of interest, but to not vote on them publicly doesn't restore any type of faith or confidence that that's not just a slush fund going to political cronies and friends. So I think that decision was wrong. Second, you know, the chief administrative officer position. This is a position that is going to have a generational impact on San Diego County. And in the past, the supervisors have been well within their rights to conduct that process in private behind closed doors. That is legal. But given where we are now, and given that there is this loss of trust at the county, I think it's important that we open that process up to the public and give the public the option to weigh in. Supervisors come and go. This individual will have the ability to impact the county for many, many years. San Diego Unified gave the public 30 different opportunities, more than 30 opportunities to weigh in through public hearings and town halls. Why should the CAO be any different? I think we would do a lot to restore trust in our system and faith in our local government by doing that. And then third, you know, we don't have an independent county ethics commission. Why is that? We should have one of those. You know, more than ever, I think it's important to have an independent body that can actually ensure the impartiality of county employees, including elected officials. So those are three things that I'd like to see happen at the county to help restore some of the trust in local government and ensure transparency.
I'll ask my housing question if nobody else has a question. On housing, the remarkable thing in California is what we don't talk about. In Japan and in Great Britain, hundreds of thousands of prefab units using much, much better techniques than were the norm 60 years ago have quickly been used to put up units everywhere in Japan and Britain. And it's easy. You can go online and order a house for $40,000 or $50,000. The labor is minimal to get it done. But in California, we never even get to the point where they've got too long ago in Japan and Great Britain, where this is even considered. On the one hand, you have the building unions that say, no way, we don't want to lose our jobs. And on the other hand, you have the construction companies that say, no way, we don't want to lose our profit margins. So I still await for a politician to come forward and say, you're both wrong. There is an answer here. Cheap housing is not impossible if we actually break with the paradigm that we're stuck in. So what do you feel about my spiel there?
Cheap housing is not impossible. I agree with you. I think we need to do, as the title of the recent Oscar-winning films movie was, Everything Everywhere All at Once. We need to invest in these technologies. You know, when my mom was moving between her home before she made it to an assisted living facility, she was living in a prefabricated mobile home from, you know, like the 60s, but this is a senior housing neighborhood where all the homes were these manufactured homes. And the reason that those are one of the last places we have affordable housing in the county is because they're very cheap and easy to build. So I don't think you're wrong there. I think that has to be part of the solution. I also think we need to think a little bit differently when we think about county land in particular, how we can build workforce housing. I think what San Diego Unified is doing is really interesting. You know, they passed a bond measure, raised some capital, and are now building workforce housing using their own land, eliminating one of the biggest costs for new housing development. And they're going to be able to provide low cost and affordable and middle income housing to their teachers, to their administrators, to their janitors. The county has tens of thousands of employees. I'd love to see us follow suit and do something similar on county land as well.
You already talked a little bit about the reserves and how you think they're too large, but you also mentioned that you think there may be a recession coming. So how do those two balance out? Shouldn't we be saving more money for the hard times that are coming and the services needs that we'll need to cover?
I think if we have, more than what the state says is a fiscally responsible amount, 3 times more, that we have an opportunity to invest some of those resources into things that our San Diegans want to see problems solved now. So we want to ensure that we have law enforcement officials and firefighters who can get out quickly to emergencies, and recruiting and retaining those folks is a big problem. People want there to be more emergency shelters for people who are currently living on the streets. And so using some of our resources to address that is a fiscally prudent, I think, way of using our resources. We're not going to spend down to zero, but there's a big difference between putting some of that money to work and doing nothing.
That's a quick follow-up about housing. It's an intriguing idea about workforce housing. Obviously, it's, as you pointed out, it's being done and effective elsewhere. Where specifically would you put that in San Diego County?
Well, I would like to get it as close to jobs as possible. So I think we would have to take a look at where we've got excess county land, where there's available, and where some of our biggest job sites are for county employees, and try to find places that, are obviously not in, not in high wildfire zones, but places where people can live near where they work.
How about housing more generally? I mean, a lot of candidates say we need more housing, we'll find places for it, but then those discussions never get really specific. Do you have, not necessarily, latitude and longitude, site-specific locations, but do you have general ideas of where, not just workforce housing, but just additional housing could and should go, especially given what you just said about wildfire risk?
I think we, the city of San Diego is doing its part to increase fast track by right housing in areas of the city that are close to transit, that are infill. I support that, but I also think that the rest of the county needs to do its part. We have cities around the county who are nowhere close to meeting their RHNA goals, and the county should be using its authority as it can legally to help press them to do more. Some of that could include assistance with permit processing and helping them streamline their own departments. But in the unincorporated areas as well, that over recent years, the county has developed a transportation study guide that basically said there are certain areas around the unincorporated area that are appropriate to develop housing in. And those are areas that are close to transit. And when they did that study, 94% of the land they identified as good to develop on is already developed, leaving 6% of land undeveloped. So how is it possible that we're going to get anywhere close to meeting our goals if we only have this sliver of available land that now the county has identified is incredibly valuable because it's the only land where you can actually afford to build? So I think the county needs to kind of flip that on its head. If we're saying that land is not developable because it's not close to transit, then we should run transit to those areas where that are already surrounding urban areas, places identified by the general plan, which is CEQA certified, and say, let's find a way to get to yes, so that we can rapidly increase our housing stock in places that are already urbanized, rather than saying, well, you're just going to take that off the map. And I think that that's a different way of looking at it. But if we say and we truly believe that the lack of affordable housing is the number one cause of homelessness and is the number one cost of rising cost of living here in San Diego, if we really believe that, then the answer is to build more housing at every income level. And we have to figure out ways to do that, not just talk about it. And I think San Diegans are people I'm talking to on the doors. They are sick of hearing that, oh, we have to build more affordable housing. And yet every year rents go up and houses become more expensive. And we've found more and more ways to say no to things instead of trying to get to yes. And I really want the county to get to yes, so that people my generation and below, people who are getting older and are needing different types of housing, can stay in San Diego County, can remain here, can make their lives here, get a foot in the door. It's just not the reality right now. And I'm very fortunate to own my home, or as I like to say, in the process of buying it back from the bank. I was able to buy a home because I served in the military. I signed my name on the dotted line to die for my country. I don't think that should be the bar for home ownership in San Diego County. And right now, unfortunately, for too many people, it is.
And another follow-up question about jails. I'm just wondering if you want to assess Kelly Martinez, or if you will assess Kelly Martinez's time as sheriff. She's been there coming up on a year. What do you think of the work she's done stepping into a role with a lot of problems?
She certainly stepped into a world with a lot of problems. You know, I without directly supervising her, I would, be reticent to weigh in too heavily here. But I think she inherited quite a mess and has been rather, relatively transparent with how she's going about implementing the recommendations from the state audit. I appreciated that she opened her doors up. I do think there are things that, she said she was going to release all the details around jail deaths. She hasn't done that. I think she needs to be held accountable to do that. But I also appreciate that she and her department are very much aware of the fact that they are our region's largest mental health care provider, and they also agree that that's wrong. And so I want to be able to support our law enforcement so that they can do their jobs, prevent crime, keep people safe in our neighborhoods, be able to respond quickly to deaths in the community. I went out on a ride along with our deputy sheriffs a couple of weeks ago, spent an evening with them. They were supposed to have 8 deputies on that evening out in East County. They had 6, and that it reduces their ability to do their jobs. But at the same time, it's important that we have accountability and transparency. And I think we can do both. I think we can protect. We know that there are problems in our system. We know that in law enforcement in particular, that Black people get stopped more often. That's wrong. We know that's wrong. We know there are racial disparities in our system. We know that we have real issues at hand. But I don't think we have to choose between our civil liberties and public safety. I think we can do both. We need to be able to keep people safe. And that means we have to do both. Public safety means everybody should be treated fairly under the letter of the law. We need to ensure that we are setting the conditions to do that. And so I think it's important that our law enforcement knows that they are an important and valued part of our community, but also that we're going to hold them accountable, just like I'd hold any agency in our county accountable for mishandling an issue. And I think that if we applied that set of standards to government in general, we would have a more effective and more efficient bureaucracy across the board.
Efficient bureaucracy, there's a concept. Thank you for that answer. Let me ask my teammates, does anyone have any follow-up questions or want to cover anything that we haven't yet? Okay, Janessa, the mic is yours. If there's anything that we haven't covered that you want to, throw it out there, and this is your chance for a closing statement.
Sure. Well, one thing we didn't talk about, which is surprising to me, is veterans and military families here in San Diego County. This district has one of the highest densities in the nation, and we know that our military families, many of our active duty military families, are really struggling. The cost of living exceeds, in many cases, their housing allowance. Congress still hasn't found a way to fix the fact that they get taxed on their food benefits, housing benefits, and we're seeing an increase in military families using food banks, which, I know if you're a service member or member of service, you're in North Carolina, you're the people volunteering at the food banks. You're in Virginia, you're the people who are out there passing out food, and it's wrong. So I think our county, it's really important to have leadership at the county who is going to prioritize this major chunk of our population, who is serving our nation, who is bringing economic opportunity to San Diego, was a big part of the driver of our economy here in San Diego County. I think we could be doing a lot more to better serve our military families, and I just want to make sure that doesn't get lost.
Thank you for raising that issue, and thank you for your time. I appreciate you spending the hour with us today.
I very much appreciate talking to y'all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Take
you.
care.
Thanks.
Bye.